So this is Chaser. It's a multi-tap delay. I'm presenting three different forks of it. This is Chaser Stereo, which is the most simplistic version. Then there's Chaser No Last Name Given, which adds some filtering and diffusion and makes for more of an experimental sound design platform. And then there's Chaser Gran, which uses granular engines for things like pitch shifting and also gets into weird sound design stuff, as you might expect. But we're going to start with Chaser Stereo because it shares qualities with all of the others. It's the original, it's what everything was forked from. But it's also the simplest, so we can sort of get the basics down and then talk about the specifics of the other models when we get to those. So what it is a 5-tap stereo delay. And this version's called stereo because the other two sum the input to mono before producing a stereo image with panning and that sort of thing. This one has a stereo signal path throughout, although there is panning. Panning's a big part of this patch. So, you know, obviously there are places where that stereo image is changed and distorted, but it has stereo delay lines, stereo VCAs, stereo panners. So if you're really concerned about preserving the movement of something, this is probably the way to go. It has fewer features because of that, but that's sort of the compromise game of playing around with the CPU. So I'm going to talk about the features that all of them have in common. Across the top is an 8-button selector that lets you choose different panning schemes. So we have like side to side here. We hear it sort of going from side to side. We have side to side exponential. So the first one, it's sort of evenly spaced. And I should point this out before we go too much further. There's a pan spread control here that lets you control the width. But it also goes into the negative range. So when that happens, if your side to side pan will switch sides, right? So instead of going left to right, it'll go right to left. And the other, panning schemes will all do the same thing. Obviously, that's what happens when it gets inverted. So that's, useful to keep in mind. That's why I didn't have to create a left to right and right to left scheme. I just said you can set the pan how you want, or the pan spread how you want. So the exponential one is also a side to side, but it's more clustered. So it grows exponentially. The distance between the taps grows exponentially. And I'm not going to show off all of the different panning schemes. There's inside out, where the pans move from the outside or inside to the outside, and there's outside in, and then there's 2 patterns that I just programmed that I like because they sort of chase around the stereo field. There's a user option, and the user controls are found on the second page, and you can set whatever panning scheme you want at that point. So, whatever floats your boat. And then there's a random option. I'll just point out that the random option changes each time you press the button. So okay, so that's the panning stuff, and I'm just, there's a lot to get through. I think it's pretty cool. It was sort of like the first thing I thought of when I was putting this patch together. there's a level control for all of the taps. So the first time you hear any of the taps, you'll hear them at full volume unless you affect the level, because they're all sort of in series and they so there's no decay between them. But you can simulate decay if you want to using the levels, or you can get more esoteric with it, and put in sort of like ghost notes and have it sort of undulate in volume. There's a lot of different things you can do with the level controls, especially in conjunction with the panning. There's a time offset control for each of the taps. And so let's talk about how time is set on the patch. There's a tap tempo here with the left stomp switch. It also accepts MIDI clock. It also, this thing that shows the tap tempo can also be tapped itself. If you're porting this to Zebu, for instance, and you want a tap tempo, or you just don't want to use the foot switch. Either way, it's your right to do whatever you want with. There's also a delay time control. This will override the tap tempo, and then tap tempo will override it. So you can choose between the two. So that sets the base tempo. The delays are set up in series. So delay 1 feeds into delay 2, feeds into delay 3. And you can offset the time up to 0% of the base time or 200%. So at 0%, there won't be any delay at all. At 200%, the delay for that tap will be twice as long as the tapped in or set baseline delay time. And using that, you can get sort of interesting rhythmic stuff going on. So like I have these set up to note intervals because that's easier for me to just dial things in, because I think, minus A5 is also minus 500, but you might want to change that if you're less comfortable with that. But minus 500 would be 50% less than the base time, and so you get an eighth note instead of a quarter note. And you can set it to, if you set it to, again, I'm just dialing this in the way I think of it, although I might be wrong. Minus 7.5, that'd be 75% less, or only 25% of the total time, and that's a 16th note. So, you get this opportunity, and you can obviously do stuff in between these sort of set notes and get more exotic rhythms going on. But it's a way to set up really sort of rhythmic delays. And then there's the tap, regen tap control. It chooses which tap the delay regenerates through, which output is used for the feedback loop. And depending on what that is, you'll get different sort of effects. So this is from the first delay, and things kind of die out. If you put it on the 5th delay, the whole sequence will repeat itself, sort of like having a tap at the end of that sequence, or the feedback mean at the end of that sequence. And if you put it in between, you get some other rhythmic effects. Finally, there's a sum, which takes the output of all the taps and uses that for the feedback. Things get kind of chaotic there. That's also where, you know, something like the delay time option comes in handy. You can create sort of like pseudo reverb things with really, really short delay times that are kind of hard to tap in. It can sort of ring out a bit. So you got to be careful with the regeneration amount in that position. There's a wet and dry level control, and then the modulation is a little bit weird. I wanted something that could be both sort of chorusy stuff and weirder things. So it's scaled such that until about 0.20, you get chorus, sort of normal range of pitch effects. But then as you increase the depth, some weirder stuff happens. You get these really intense pitch artifacts. I realize that's not everyone's cup of tea, which is why there's sort of that scaling effect, right? So you can get both the pleasant, sort of tamer modulation stuff, but also you can push it and get really weird, wacky things. So that is Chaser Stereo. So this is Chaser, no last name given. The difference between it and the last one we looked at is that it includes two different features, or yeah, let's call it two different features. We have filtering on this one with both an adjustable frequency and an adjustable Q. And I'll point out there's a low pass filter and a high pass filter. When the Q is below about 0.5, you'll hear more aggressive cutting of that sound below the or above, in the high pass filter's case, the filter frequency. When you go above 0.5, you start getting more resonance, and so sounds will build up at the cutoff frequencies, which can give you some elements that you hear in some like analog delays and that sort of thing, where they get that feedback. It's not super intense in this patch, but there's some of it. So you can use those to do all sorts of things. I like, for instance, you know, using the low pass filter to create a more analog sound. The repeats getting darker each time they pass through. But you can also do fun stuff with the high pass filter. sort of cutting off the low end progressively, which is sort of a tape effect. Speed up the time. Yeah, right there at about 175 hertz, you get a real nice effect. We could also, you know, again, sort of have that cut and boost at the same time. The thing that people often overlook about high-pass filters is that they're a great way to boost bass as well. You know, often you use them to clean up the low end, but if the resonance is high enough, then you're creating a peak right where you're sort of cutting off those low frequencies. So you can do a lot of interesting stuff with those two filters and an adjustable Q for each of them. And then the other feature is diffusion. So we can create sort of a cloud, like quasi-reverb thing. Which is particularly nice with the adjustability of the delay taps and the panning and all that sort of thing. You can create these really sort of immersive 3D, you know, like pads and textures and that sort of thing. And you can also, it's adjustable, so you can have things that are kind of a cross between a delay and a diffuse delay. The diffusion control is actually a wet-dry mix for the diffusion. So I think that's a really fun option to play around with, along with all the other things going on in the patch with the panning and the level selecting and the sort of rhythmic options. You can get a lot going on with Chaser, no last name given. So this is Chaser Gran. A couple of things right off the bat that are different. Instead of 5 taps like the other 2 forks have, this one only has 4. Obviously, you might have picked up that that's because it also includes granular engines. And specifically, I wanted the option to sort of include some pitch shifting and that sort of thing. So each of the 4 taps has their own pitch control, and you can set up, you know, right now I have it pretty simple with some, you know, pitch down, pitch way up, and some non-pitch stuff, but you can, you know, do whatever you want with the pitches. The interesting thing that affects is the regeneration routing then gets passed through the pitch shifting. So if it's pitched up, you get these sort of pitch up artifacts. Here we have pitch down. So it gets pitched down each time it goes through. It can be pitched up. One thing to keep in mind is that there's a regeneration tone control. What this really is a low pass filter in the feedback path. There's also a high pass non-adjustable filter in the feedback path. But, you know, particularly when you're pitching up, it can get into that you know, like it's kind of nice sometimes to have that really digital pixelation thing going on, but you can tame that a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit by adjusting the tone as it regenerates. But that's an option. It'll affect the amount of regeneration, obviously, because you're cutting out, um, you know, you're cutting out energy as you know, cut off the high end as it regenerates through. So it'll be less energetic each time, regardless of the regen position. And the regeneration in this patch is already just weird. There are some ways in which it doesn't work great as like a delay. A lot of the rhythmic features, you can still offset all the delays, but like there's an added delay caused by the granular modules themselves, and that depends on the grain size that you use. But regardless, you're going to have some latency between the onset. I can show this pretty dramatically if I just set the time of the first delay to 0. This is a neat effect that I use sometimes, but you won't hear like you'll hear a lag between the note played and then the pitched up note that follows. And I can decrease that lag by changing the grain size, but only so much. So one way to use this patch then is like a multi-voice pitch shifter. If you set all the offsets to 0, then all the pitches will be played close to the onset. They'll all be delayed a little bit, but the offset doesn't, the delay will be minimal from one another because the delay lines are what gets passed on and on. It doesn't go from granular module to granular module. So those latencies aren't compounded the more you move around in the timeline. So like I was saying, there are some ways in which, like the other two patches I think are really nice for these sort of rhythmic things. And here some of that kind of breaks down because you've got the latency of the granular modules, which need time to record what they're doing and all that sort of stuff. But you pick up on like weird, granular, cool stuff. So it's sort of a bit of a trade-off. So along with the pitch controls, there's a control for grain size. Again, increasing that will increase the latency, but you'll also get, different effects. There's a control for texture, which if you're not familiar with it, texture applies an envelope to the grains. So the higher the texture, the more, it's like a attack decay envelope. So, it goes square, no texture, and then slowly you get this triangular shape, which makes them sound smoother. If we take the texture down, they'll become a bit more abrasive. But that may be something you're after. There's a density control. which, you know, kind of has a tremolo effect on the output. And then there's a position modulation. Instead of pitch modulation like in the other ones, we get position modulation. And this adds sort of a, I mean, you're hearing it now. I kept it on this whole time. I probably should have taken it off, but it'll cause the position control of the granular module to fluctuate. Each of them is individually controlled by a random module, and you can set the depth of that modulation here. But basically, you know, what that means is that it'll skip around in the buffer of the granular module. So you get these sort of shifting sounds, and sometimes it sounds like it's moving backward. You know, it's I think a really like neat way to add some unpredictability to an already unpredictable patch, since I said, you know, all the timing stuff kind of goes out the window. But this is the third fork, and I just kind of like this sort of weird, granular, glitchy, stuttery stuff, so I thought, why not? And those are the Chaser patches. Thanks for checking them out. I'm sure this video is going to be pretty long by the time I edit it all together. But if you're still here, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Enjoy.